From inside the Banner offices along the Inner Harbor, it is the Banner Baseball Show. Paul Mancano and John Meoli live on X and on YouTube on this Tuesday. Give us a like, give us a thumbs up, write us a good review. If you write us a 5-star review, I'll read it out here on the podcast. John and I are dressed for two very different seasons, but such is April weather. One day it's 75 degrees, the next day it's frickin' 43. Feels like 30. Today you're dressed more like it's 75, but it's closer to 30.
Yeah, I'm going to make a stop on the way home before I go down to see the home opener of the Chesapeake Bay Sox and get several layers of clothing.
The first ever home opener for a team named the Chesapeake Bay Sox.
People are going to be asking where you were on this day, and I will be able to say both here and there.
Both here and there, and you were cold in hopefully just one of those places.
There is no cold like sitting actual scouts have to do this all the time. Like there's no cold like sitting behind in like a minor league baseball stadium seat for like 3 hours in April when
a
you're
metal
just
bench.
Yeah, and like it impacts the play because I'm saying like a lot. We talked about how I wasn't going to do that.
It's okay. I'm going to say like more to compensate for your lack of saying like now on this podcast.
Sounds fantastic. What I was saying though is that there's a lot of performance influence from the cold.
Yes.
Like when you're seeing and like when you want it to be over, the relievers are not making it be over.
Yeah.
And you just end up being cold forever.
I used to call in college, I would call a lot of Friday night football, high school games. And I will say that cold also equals this cold, especially in Syracuse, New York. You're on like a cold bleacher. The problem is it gets warm during the day. In the fall and the spring, it's warm during the day. It's sunny. You think it's great. Sun goes down. You're absolutely frigid. And it just out of nowhere gets so cold that you want to leave.
Yeah, and they don't let you do that when you're broadcasting the game, do they?
Really don't. They really don't. But it comes through in the broadcast, your lack of desire to remain in that place. It was cold in Kansas City this weekend. I'll tell you that much, John. I was at Kauffman Stadium, and the Orioles have gone on a little bit of a cold stretch offensively. They've had some blips here and there, scored 8 runs over the weekend in one of those games, scored 5 runs yesterday in Arizona in a much warmer climate, but under a dome. But I will tell you, offensively, it is awfully hard to hit at 1, Kauffman Stadium, which is a pitcher's park, 2, in the cold, and 3, in the wind. Because getting a ball out of that ballpark, the Orioles have hit, I think, 2 homers in their last 8 games now, with Ryan O'Hearn's homer yesterday. The weather is absolutely a factor in their lack of ability to hit the ball out of the ballpark.
I think they also could have just internalized that people didn't want them to hit home runs. That could be
true.
Paul.
People are pretty angry about the fact that the Orioles hit home runs more than other teams.
Yeah, it was terrible. Something needed to be done about it. And like for all the complaints about the 2025 Baltimore Orioles, they have done it. Play stupid games, you win stupid prizes. You don't want them to hit home runs? Like, here we go.
I was saying that this morning. I don't know what the context was, but that was a phrase that I used. In the words of Taylor Swift.
Yeah.
Play stupid games, win stupid prizes. Today, we're going to talk about the Orioles' 5-6 start, whether we're panicking, how worried we are about the team at this state. We're also, of course, going to talk about Brandon Hyde, because right now everybody wants to talk about the Orioles manager. We'll give you our thoughts on how he's done so far this season and going back to last year. But first, let's touch on some news and notes, some more injury notes. John, Zach Eflin yesterday looked fantastic in his 3rd start of the season, and then he left with 73 pitches, I believe, with shoulder soreness. That is a major bummer if he has to miss time. Now, he said he felt optimistic about his ability to come back and the diagnosis, but we don't know anything at this point. If Zach Eflin is to hit the injured list, the Orioles will have a rotation that is anchored by Charlie Morton, Dean Kramer, Tomoyuki Sugano, and Cade Povich, and then a 5th spot that is undetermined. How frightened does that make you to see those 4 players and then a question mark lined up?
Zach Eflin is the most reliable pitcher in the rotation at this point. So without him not having that, like this has been 2 instances in a row where the rotation has been like, and then Zach Eflin's come in and just pitched well.
Yep.
They need that. I think that if there's a shorter absence, it'll be okay. But I'm not enthused by the idea of losing Zach Eflin, because I don't know if I think more highly of him than other people. I just think he's really like he's what you want
he's
to have in your rotation.
paper.
You want to have that guy. You want to have like 3 of that guy. They might even have 3 of that guy in July, but we keep just putting off this part where they're going to have a good rotation and keeps punting it for different reasons. And part of the reason you think they could get to that point and be okay is because of Zach Eflin, and now that's teetering.
Yeah, I mean, they're talking about, you could be talking about a completely different rotation in the second half of the season if guys come back from injury than the first half. And it's just getting to that point where maybe Kyle Bradish comes back, Tyler Wells comes back, Grayson Rodriguez hopefully is going to come back before July, but another guy that could be in your rotation could be very solid for you. Right now, though, they are in shaky territory. And when you talk about that 5th spot in the rotation, candidates that should be considered for this spot because of various reasons are not available. Trevor Rogers is on the injured list. Chase McDermott is on the injured list. Kyle Gibson is still ramping up after they signed him to that 1-year deal very, very late in spring training. There are not a whole lot of options right now, which leads me to believe that if the Orioles have to insert a 5th man in that rotation, that they would go with Brandon Young, because the 26-year-old has been excellent so far in AAA, has yet to allow a run in 11 1/3 innings. At some point, sooner or later, he is either going to be a big leaguer or he's going to be a big leaguer on another team, just based on his performance going up year after year. This might have to be his time, but do you think they would pull that trigger before they go with a 4-man rotation and just utilize the off day as their 5th day?
I think the short-term plan would be to, I assume, add a reliever and get through these next, because there's 2 off days. There's one Thursday, there's one Monday. You can probably go like a week plus without adding a 5th starter. Brandon Young has pitched well, though. I don't know if there's the performance base that you would want for someone to come up from AAA. It's basically, we could call it 2 months last year, 2.5 months, 3 months, 2 starts this year. One thing I did note in the newsletter, Inside the Dugout, which subscribers to the Baltimore Banner get as a subscriber benefit.
And how do you subscribe?
Oh gosh, I was about to do that. 6 months for $1.
Yes, so long as it's not $6 for 1 month.
No, that would be good too, I think, though.
If you want to give us $6, sure.
Yeah. Venmo, my Venmo is open, but send it to Paul just so there's not a paper trail. He is averaging 93.8 miles an hour on his fastball this year. It was like 92.5 last year when he got to Norfolk. Granted, he was coming off Tommy John. It was his first full season. The way it's been described to me is that because he throws so many strikes, because he fills up the zone, and because his fastball is good, not great, there is a difference in how it plays when it's 93, 94 versus 91, 92. And if he's in that higher velocity range, I'm okay seeing that in the big leagues and seeing what that looks like. I don't know if the moment's going to be too big for him. I have a feeling it's not going to be, but this feels a little early on, not on merit, but on the balance of how they do things.
Yeah, and one of the guys who we would be considering for this spot, if he had not gotten injured, was Albert Suárez. He has now been moved to the 60-day injured list from the 15-day injured list. He's going to be out for months, as Brandon Hyde said. Not surgery, being considered for a subscapularis injury, which is the muscle right below the scapula, according to Google. He is going to miss a lot of time.
And according to our pal Danielle Allentuck, who has an intimate knowledge of shoulder injuries.
Yeah.
I was texting you yesterday and she said, I know what that means.
Yeah, she is currently on the injured list herself. I think she's on the 15-day. I don't think she's on the 60-day. We don't want to transfer her there just yet, but we wish her the absolute best as she continues to recover from her own shoulder issues. She did have surgery. Albert Suárez is not having surgery.
Yes.
However, Albert Suárez is going to miss a lot of time, and he's 35 years old. So anytime somebody undergoes a significant injury like that, you do worry about his ability to bounce back and be himself. The Orioles have the benefit of having him under contract for a few more years. So I'm not going to say that we've seen the very last of Albert Suárez in an Orioles uniform, but I think certainly the season is when the manager says a guy's going to be out for months and the season is 6 months long, it feels like it's a possibility that he won't pitch again in 2025.
Yeah. Then we talked a lot as spring training was going on in the early part of the season about him. And and the performance issues that he was having. And this kind of checks out in a weird way. I'm not saying that I'm not saying he was hurt all along. It just feels like this explains a lot, and this is a structural issue that will impact your ability to do all the things that he does well, which is locate the ball, which is be consistent, and then his delivery and his mechanics and stuff like that. I'm not going to close the book on him, but I'm not opening to the Albert Suárez page first. I'm going to open to the Kyle Bradish page and the Tyler Wells page and the Grayson Rodriguez page, and maybe even like the Trevor Rogers and Chase McDermott page.
Yeah.
Albert Suárez was fantastic for the team for what he did last year, and I'm not sure they are the team that they were making the playoffs, being in the playoffs for an hour and a half. If not for his contributions. If you wanted to put on your realist glasses, and as opposed to the optimist ones, sitting here in October, we probably could have confidently said we'd probably seen the best of Albert Suárez. Sure. And not to say that this is the last of it. We probably just have seen the best.
Yeah, I mean, the 3.64 ERA last year, bouncing between the rotation and the bullpen, he was excellent. And I think that there was natural concern that he wouldn't be able to, not concern, but understanding that he wouldn't be able to repeat that. I mean, it came out of nowhere. It was remarkable. The Orioles needed every one of his innings, but to be able to repeat that again at age 35 would be very unlikely. All right, let's talk about where this Orioles team is as a whole right now. They are 5-6 as we stand. They've won the first game of their series in Arizona. They looked like, as Andy Kuska of the Baltimore Banner reported, that was the most complete win of the season in a lot of ways. You know, it was great pitching on the starting side. They had the bullpen come in and close it out. Gunnar Henderson finally started to look like himself. Adley Rutschman delivered some key hits. They looked very good and very complete. However, the first 10 games of the season have not gone exactly according to plan. Part of that is the Orioles were missing Gunnar Henderson for a lot of that. Another part of that is Colton Cowser is now out for a significant amount of time with a broken thumb. But a 5-6 record in this division to start the season is not ideal. I, however, am not panicking, John, and I don't know where your panic meter is, but for me, it's closer on a scale of 1 to 10. It's closer to a 2 than it is a 7 or 8.
Yeah, I think that there's a fundamental issue, and I was trying to suss it out when I was writing the newsletter. Like, this is 11 games. This is not a meaningful
sample size.
Yeah, but the way that the Orioles are winning when they're winning is they're playing really, really good baseball. They're scoring a ton of runs and they're pitching. Mm-hmm. And when they are losing, they're not hitting. They're not catching the ball. They look like a bad team when they lose. They look like a truly, truly bad team when they lose. And that is undermining to everything that this team is built on right now. It's undermining to everything they built to this point.
Yeah.
They don't throw to the wrong base. They don't how many times are guys not going to slide into home plate before like something bad happens?
Yeah. They've been fundamentally unsound in a lot of their losses.
And, you know, it's a long season. I don't know where the cutoff is. Like a player once told me that 5 runs is the amount of runs that a major league player, like if they're losing by 5 runs in a game, they're not packing it in.
Right.
But they understand how that game is going to go and what is going to happen the rest of it, and they act accordingly. I'm not saying that's universal. That's one player's opinion. There have been tens of thousands of people to play in the big leagues. I'm not saying that guys are packing it in early, but I am saying this team is playing some uncharacteristically bad baseball when they lose, which is one more game than they've won. They are undermining all the things that they need to have happen. They're undermining the patience that's required for a team whose closer just had Tommy John, whose starting rotation is far better on the injured list than it is in reality. Yep. Whose lineup is going to be missing one of their key players for 2 months in Colton Cowser, who are trying to break in, you know, younger players into everyday roles. All the things they want to do, they cannot do if every other night they're not competitive.
Yeah.
This is about treading water, and this is about being in a position to be better in the second half and be the hot team come October. And That's not to say that they're not in position for that. They're just, I think it is damning, and they lose a lot of the shield that the circumstances give them when they go out and they play terribly.
Yeah, at this point, I think we're early enough right now where everybody is kind of looking for confirmation. Everybody has confirmation bias here. And for the fans that threw in the towel last year or were incredibly frustrated, either stopped watching the team or just lost faith in this regime in the second half of last year when they go 500 down the stretch and get swept out of the playoffs or in the playoffs for an hour and a half, like you said.
Hour and a half, yeah.
I think that those fans look at the 5-6 record and they say, see, this is a bad team. I told you this was a bad team. They're making all the same mistakes that they made last year. They can't hit. They can't score without a home run. This is not the team that played in the first half of 2024. And for you and I, who predicted that the Orioles would win 90-plus games, I predicted 95. I think you said 92 or 93.
In that range.
In that range. I think that my first inclination, naturally, is to look for positive signs here, to look for excuses for why they've come out to a slow start. And I have to recognize that and say, if at some point the sample size is going to be large enough that we kind of have an idea of what this team is going to be. And if that doesn't jive with my preseason predictions, I have to come to terms with that fact. But at this point, I do want to throw out just a couple excuses, I guess I could say.
Okay.
One, I think they have played good teams so far. Granted, tiny sample size again. But Toronto, I think, is a fine team. Boston was my pick to go to the World Series from the American League. I think they're a very good team. And they've taken one game from Arizona. And Kansas City, they knocked them out of the playoffs last year. I think the Royals are, again, going to be a pretty good team. Two, the weather. I think the weather has definitely been a factor. This team is going to rely heavily on home runs. And the fact that they can't hit home runs because it's too cold right now is a factor in why they're not scoring a whole lot of runs. And like you said, John, this team is supposed to be better in the second half than they are in the first half. It's supposed to be flipped from last year. And frankly, that's what you'd prefer as a fan or as for somebody following this team. You would prefer a situation where they are better in the second half than they are in the first, because that is more likely to carry over into the postseason. They will look more like their true selves as they head into the playoffs. And that's when you want them to be playing their best baseball. And you still could have that. You still could have Kyle Bradish and Tyler Wells come back. You still could have Felix Bautista getting back over 100 miles an hour with his fastball. You still could have a lot of ways that this team could be better in the second half than they are in the first half. However, 5-6 is not the best way to start the season. And aside from Gunnar being out and not being himself for a few days, and aside from Colton Cowser being out and Felix Bautista taking some time to ramp up, this team should have a better record right now than they currently do.
Yes. I'm just challenged to not cut them the slack, because I think my view is that this is early and they deserve slack. But part of the reason that a lot of people feel the way you're talking about is because there hasn't been anything to change their mind.
Yes.
It wasn't as if they went out and meaningfully changed the narrative of the offseason with anything that they did in there. It was to people who were paying attention, a lot of the samey stuff that the Orioles always do. Just, they're just not balling on a budget anymore. There's money. They can do all the same things they want, but they can spend money doing it. There's just not been as many. It's just stop and start. If we were having this conversation tomorrow and they lose 6-1 today and have 3 hits and it's not good, we would not feel compelled to look on the bright side.
Yeah.
If we were having this conversation yesterday, we would probably not feel compelled to look on the bright side. We'd probably be a lot more down on it based on how Sunday's game went. It's just not a fun way to experience a baseball season. And it doesn't feel like April, even though it is. It's still April, but it seems like this team, fair, unfair, however you want to call it, is still, nothing has happened to change any of the perceptions from last year. And because of that, we're just stuck in this cycle of everything being exactly what anyone thinks it is. And all it really is 11 games. If they go 9-2 in the next 11 games, they're one of the better teams in baseball. And that's not to say that these 2 weeks didn't happen, but those 2 weeks could happen too. And they could go 2-9, and it probably still wouldn't fundamentally be different. It would be a lot less pleasant, but it wouldn't be fundamentally different as a team.
Yeah.
So you're just talking about when you're having the conversation. You see people. I guarantee tomorrow someone will ask me about the Orioles and it'll be a different conversation than it is today.
Yeah.
And that's something they can prevent. They can just not be as bad when they lose, and that would be fine.
Yeah, I mean, baseball is just not a game-to-game, day-to-day sport. I mean, football is, because they only have 17 chances in the regular season. But baseball, you can't live and die with every loss. And I understand that from a fan perspective, it's difficult for them to invest 3 hours of their time into watching a game, especially a late-night game like these games they're playing in Arizona.
Yeah.
But also, every game, I say for fans that react very harshly to any one loss in the regular season, that's less than 1% of their season. So they are 11 games in. That is less than 10% of their season so far. So I don't think we should, if the Orioles were 9-2 at this point, we shouldn't react overly and say that they're the World Series favorites. I mean, they might look very good. They might look very bad for any one stretch of time. It's just the hangover from last season is so much affecting how people are thinking coming into this season. And the expectations for this team are justifiably high. And if the Orioles underperform at any one stretch of the season, there's a group of fans or media members or whoever, outside third-party people, that are going to jump on this team and look for confirmation for their take that this team is not as good as they think. And it's just too early to do that one way or the other. So that's me on my soapbox. That's me on my high horse.
Yeah, I was trying to figure it out. I think if this was like a football season, it would be like midway through the third quarter in week 1.
Yeah.
Which, if you lose the first game, that's a loss that counts. But
the Ravens lost their first 2 games last year. They lost to the Chiefs on a heartbreaking play, and then they lost to the Raiders in an ugly game at M&T Bank. They were 0-2 to start the year. They ended up making the playoffs pretty easily. Lamar ended up being an MVP finalist, should have won the MVP. I know they got bounced early from the playoffs, but come on. Let's slow our horses right now.
Yeah, and I'm just pulling up right now, like just the team's batting stats. There's 8 players. The OPS is over 750 who are basically regulars.
Yeah.
Then you get down to Heston Kjerstad, whose OPS is 610, who is feeling his way into this everyday role. And then you have Colton Cowser, who's hurt. And then you have Gunnar Henderson, who was hurt and is still rounding back into form.
Playing in his 4th game.
There's no obvious significant underperformers. Like,
no.
I don't have any thoughts about Jorge Mateo's OPS being 0. I have no thoughts about that. It's not a remarkable thing to me at this point in my life.
Yeah.
So like, miss me with all that, but we're
going to talk about
about
Jorge Mateo in just a bit.
I know. We have to. But we're talking about a handful of guys who maybe could say are underperforming, like in a small sample offensively. Pitching wise, you want to see Charlie Morton not to give up as many runs, but you're encouraged by the strikeouts. You want to see Dean Kramer not have these like innings get away from him. You want to see Zach Eflin not be hurt.
Yeah.
You want to see CNL Perez not give up a million runs. But otherwise, like even the bullpen is on an individual basis, you're basically talking about a majority of the runs that the bullpen has given up, or that one Felix Bautista outing, CNL Perez over the course of several outings, and Albert Suárez. Are there any other relievers? I guess Keegan Aiken had a couple tagged to him.
Stretch. Yeah.
I don't think that when they play badly, they should get any slack for that. Like we should not cut them any slack when they go out and play badly. I think that these are the types of things that normalize them.
Yeah. And to look back at last year, I looked through the first 10-ish games of the 2024 season. And sure, a lot of the teams that ended up being good were good for the first 10 games. A lot of the teams that ended up being bad were bad for the first 10 games. But you do have anomalies in there. The Astros were 2-7 in their first 9 games. The Mets, as we recall, were awful for the first half of last season. They ended up going to the NLCS. The Pirates were 9-2. So you have it on both ends of the spectrum. So let's not jump to any conclusions at this point. But I think the frustrating thing for a lot of fans too who came into the season with these preconceived notions about who Brandon Hyde is as a manager, feel like they have seen enough from the Orioles skipper. And we're going to talk about now what Brandon Hyde has done so far this season, what his role is, and why there's kind of an inherent issue with the conversation around Brandon Hyde. Through 11 games so far this season, John, the Orioles have put out 11 different lineups. And part of that is the fact that Colton Cowser started the season healthy. He's not healthy anymore. Gunnar Henderson started the season hurt. He's not hurt anymore. This is what the Orioles do. We're used to this. But we've seen some funky lineups. And I think things rose to a fever pitch. The frustration reached an apex on Sunday when the Orioles were facing left-hander Chris Bubich, who has reverse splits, pitches better against right-handed hitters, I should say, than left-handed hitters. So what did Brandon Hyde and the Orioles do? They loaded up their lineup with 7 right-handed hitters and 1 switch hitter being Adley Rutschman. They went Gunnar Henderson, Adley Rutschman, and then 7 right-handed hitters. The Orioles collected 5 hits in that game. They scored 1 run. It was on a wild pitch. And perhaps the more concerning, the more curious decision that was made in the lineup was putting Jorge Mateo in center field, giving Cedric Mullins, who has been awesome to start the season, the day off. Jorge Mateo not only went 0 for at the plate, and he's 0 for his first 11, but dropped a very, very, very catchable 99% catch probability, according to StatCast ball, off the bat of Bobby Witt Jr. Bobby Witt Jr. turns it into a triple. It was very generously scored a triple, and it was an ugly situation, an ugly scene, and the decision that was made in the lineup to put Jorge Mateo in the outfield backfired immediately. That's when things got really, really bad. John, as you look right now at how the Orioles construct their lineups, first off, on a micro level, what did you think of that lineup Sunday? What did you think of the decision to put Jorge Mateo in center and how everything played out?
I think there are better center fielders among the right-handed hitting platoon brigade than Jorge Mateo. I think that's a starting point on that. Ramon Laureano can play center field. He is, a center fielder by trade. So that feels like it would have been a little more realistic. I get why the lineup was what it was in terms of the personnel. This is the type of thing, and I'm going to talk out of both sides of my mouth right now. So this is both the type of thing that, hold on, I'm trying to think of how I want to say this. This is the type of thing that you are always going to do at this point in the season. And I guess it's not both sides of my mouth. This is the type of thing you're going to do when you go out and build your team around the idea we're going to have 4 guys who are right-handed hitters who come in when we face lefties. And you can, if we get to June, July, and Heston Kjerstad's red hot, maybe one of those guys sits because because the splits say so.
Yeah.
I don't think there's a lot of value in doing that now.
Those 4 guys being,
they're here.
Yeah.
Like they are here and on this team. They have to play. If they're not going to play in the second week of the season against the lefty when you sign them to face lefties, you're undermining a lot of what you did all winter, and that's not something I don't think they want to do. With that said, this is also the type of thing you do in June or July. You just say, you know what, this is what we're doing. Like, everybody who is not in there needs a break. Everybody is in there needs to play. And you can do that if you're 15 games over 500 and you're feeling good about it and you're coming. But this team is just operating with, I think, thinner margins of grace than they need.
Yeah.
That's not to say that they should get it or deserve it, but this is the type of thing that you just do it. If you sign a right-handed hitting outfielder or have players on your roster to fill these roles and you can't trust them to do it this early, like, sure, if it's 3 months from now and all these guys still aren't hitting lefties and have no reason to be on this team, I bet they move on from them. But you can't, you're not sending a good message to do that now, especially when you're talking about veteran guys who are established and probably had certain roles communicated to them when they decided to be here.
Yeah. The line that Brandon Hyde said after the game when he was asked about why the Orioles went with that righty-heavy lineup. He said, it's more of, quote, it's more of, we acquired and signed right-handed guys to face left-handed starters, and we're going to give them an opportunity, especially early in the year here, to hopefully handle left-handed pitching for us, end quote. Especially early in the year here is the key statement there. And you mentioned the 4 right-handed guys, Ramon Arias, Gary Sanchez, Ramon Laureano, and Jorge Mateo being those 4 guys. Tyler O'Neill, I think, is going to play, especially with Cowser out. Tyler O'Neill is going to be in most lineups, and he should be because he's been excellent to start the season so far. And he can hit lefties great. He can also hit righties pretty well. Those 4 guys right now are certainly struggling to start the season. The things that I completely understand from Hyde's perspective is you want to give Cedric Mullins time off, and Brandon Hyde specifically mentioned it was Cedric Mullins has dealt with lower body stuff the last couple of years, and that has hindered his ability to stay on the field and at times his performance. I completely understand that. If you can give him a day off early in the year that will help him later, completely get it. Same goes for Tyler O'Neill, who is dealt with so many injuries, been on the injured list 14 times in his career. If you can give him a day off here or there, I completely understand that. What I don't fully understand is continuing to try Jorge Mateo in the outfield when we have seen it time and time again, and it hasn't really worked. I mean, now remember, he did start as kind of a positionless player in San Diego when he made his big league debut. He was used in the outfield as well as the infield, but then he was moved to the infield in 2022 and was excellent defensively there. And then since then, the Orioles keep trying him in center field. And I know he has the speed. I know he has a strong enough arm. I just don't see it defensively for him in center field. I don't understand why they keep trying to make this happen.
It feels like something they wouldn't do in a lot of other scenarios. I'm trying to think of like another player they would
force into the spot like that.
Force kind of. I don't remember specifically how much he played there in center field, but he had like in spring training, but he had a limited spring. Like this doesn't feel like something they would do otherwise. And I'm sure there was a reason for it, but I'm thinking to a game last year when, him being in center field impacted whether they won or lost. And I'm thinking of this game that, pretty much flipped on it early on. It's not something that it's just not really something that you should be asking him to do when you have alternatives. This team ran out Anthony Santander in center field in 2019. They had Stevie Wilkerson come up with an infielder's glove from Norfolk and be like, okay, you're the center fielder now.
And then make an outstanding catch at Fenway Park. Let's never forget that.
That was an unforgettable day.
Stevie Wilkerson, a couple unforgettable moments in Baltimore. The save in Anaheim.
Dr. Poo-Poo.
Dr. Poo-Poo, as they called him.
Yeah. Gosh. I mean, I don't know. I think it was an unfair position to put him in, but I also I'm wondering what they think is the reason for doing it. And I'm also wondering how many innings, how many starts, how much exposure to center field do they actually need to realize that this is just like a platoon infielder and like maybe an emergency center fielder versus a starting center fielder on a getaway day. Like that's what I'm wondering at this point.
And I do also, from the team's perspective, understand him having this final roster spot, Jorge Mateo having that 26th spot on the 26-man roster. I get it. Even though he's 0 for his first 11, he is out of options. You would have to DFA him if you wanted to send him down. And Dylan Carlson has options. Dylan Carlson is also not a great hitter. I know he is a switch hitter, but another guy who is closer to a quad A player than at this point in his career than he is an everyday big leaguer. So I get it, wanting to make Jorge Mateo work because he has the speed and because he is not as good defensively as he used to be, but he still is a good defender who can play at shortstop. So I understand them going with Mateo over Carlson. But I think the bigger problem here when we have conversations about Brandon Hyde and his role in creating a lineup in bullpen decisions, we don't entirely know how much he's responsible for writing each lineup. I mean, he is the manager. Ultimately, he puts his name on the lineup, but a modern front office, as we know, is pretty top down. And I'm not saying the Orioles are this way, because they are very, understandably private about the way that roster decisions, that lineup decisions are made. But oftentimes it comes from the GM, his team of analysts who consult with the manager, and together they produce a lineup. And so to me, the Orioles are always going to be run in a way where whoever is going to be the manager has to work intimately with the analytics department, with Mike Elias and the front office. And so whether it's Brandon Hyde, whether it's somebody else, the Orioles would not bring in somebody who clashes with that way of thinking, who clashes with the way that Mike Elias does things, and who would fight back tooth and nail to make sure that he had complete control over the lineup. So I think the difficult part here is parsing out exactly how much Brandon Hyde has to do with the 9 guys that go on the lineup.
Yeah, and without knowing specifically the process, I think the way that I've always thought about it is when you hear the Orioles front office talk about how they use data, they are very focused on, having all the information and getting the people who make decisions the right information, and the decisions being made are being made by people who interpret all the information and data they have well. So yes, there are reams and reams of paper, probably boiled down to like a 1-pager, that Brandon Hyde will get on a daily basis, I'm sure, with matchups and history and projection type stuff. That is one set of information. I think there's also a set of information that the manager can have and that somebody in the front office cannot. How is so-and-so feeling today? How is so-and-so been with being on the bench the last 3 days? How is so-and-so, what are the hitting coaches say they're working on? Is there somebody popping into his office and saying, Hyder, we've been working on this and it looks pretty good. I'm interested to see it in the game. All that stuff is, I'm not saying equal to left-right splits or reverse splits or this and that and the other thing, but those are inputs into this system that the Orioles probably have in place to say, all right, here's how it goes. I don't know specifically whether these things, whether there's a lineup meeting, whether there's a lineup recommendation and there's deviations from it. I don't know. That seems like something that has not been publicly reported by anyone, and that's probably done for a reason. I would separate out that with, I don't know. I've never engaged in like thinking about the lineup in the way that I think a lot of people do. That might be a fault of mine. That might not be a fault of mine. Who's to really say?
Yeah.
I'm just challenged and have a hard time saying that an organization that prides itself on taking all the information they have into account to make the best decisions would actively do anything that flew in the face of that. And that includes putting out some of the lineups that they do. And there seems to be a disconnect publicly with like what it looks like and the outcomes to what went into it. I'm not sure that disconnect is maybe they say, this might be a tough day, but we will be better down the line if Cedric Mullins is 100% in August too. Maybe they don't. Maybe they think that this is how it's all going to go and reverse splits are great, but we know so-and-so, we know our guys can actually hit this pitch that other righties can't. There's too much that we don't know to actually make that assessment, but Brandon Hyde is the face of it, and he is the person that is associated most with it.
He's responsible for communicating that message to the media and therefore the fans. And when fans get answers they don't like, they can often voice frustration. But to me, the more important thing is not how he communicates that message to the fans, to the media, which as a member of the media, I prefer when we understand the reasoning and when the reasoning is clear and is made clear to us. And I think that he does a solid job of that. We've been working with him for a long time. And Brandon Hyde has, in terms of my dealings with Brandon Hyde, he's been excellent. I mean, he's been a very straightforward, straight shooter. And keep in mind, this is a guy that won Manager of the Year 2 years ago. He has done the rare thing of seeing a team through the rebuild and gotten to the other side and taken them to the playoffs. But I think the more important question is Brandon Hyde effectively communicating this message to his players? so that when Jackson Holliday and Heston Kjerstad and Cedric Mullins sit in a game where they're facing a lefty with reverse splits, do they understand why they're sitting, and are they okay with it? Maybe, sure, they could be frustrated. Every player wants to play as much as possible, but do they understand, and are they okay with those decisions? And from everything so far, we haven't heard anything to the contrary. That doesn't mean that their opinions can't change. That doesn't mean that there's stuff that they're thinking and telling other people that they're not telling us. But that is the more important question to me, is, are his players on board with it? Because a manager has to manage people more than a lineup, more than a bullpen. And so from my perspective, if he's doing that effectively, that is just as important as if he's executing from an X's and O's. I know it's not football, but from an X's and O's standpoint.
Yeah. And I think that's always been something that A, he's prided himself on, and B, he has tried to be consistent on throughout. Is, there was, my impression of the Buck Showalter era is that you didn't get the lineup the day before. You didn't, the players didn't know if they would show up and not know if they were playing. And some of them obviously did, because they were like Manny Machado and you're playing every day, but some guys didn't. And they would find out, oh, cool, I'm playing today. But then Brandon Hyde came in, they would have the lineup the day before. So you would know if you were getting a day off, you can prepare as if you're getting a day off, and you can, throttle back. You can get there and plan to lift a little more, stuff like that. I think there's probably a pretty strong amount of communication. I would imagine there's, in some cases, too much. I think it's player to player, whether you like that, whether you believe that, whether you think that, there's Cedric Mullins, I'm sure deep down in his heart doesn't mind, getting a day off his legs at this point in the season. I'm sure if you're Heston Kjerstad, you might understand it kind of, but you've been waiting to be an everyday player for 2 years now, and you want to just do that. So even if you understand it, it's not going to feel great. I think what you're getting at in terms of the communication is kind of what I'm monitoring as everyone's talking about this, is that there have been a lot of different iterations of this Orioles team. They were bad for a few years, and now they've been good for a few years. And Brandon Hyde's been here throughout all of that. I think we're seeing a lot of things that would have made him very upset in the bad old days crop up again, in terms of, mistakes that guys are making. And I think that definitely is his purview. That is his domain, and that is something that he can influence. And when he says it's unacceptable, it's because he thinks it's unacceptable. He's just saying that to the media either. He makes that known, and he makes sure they're doing what they're supposed to do to rectify that. That is the area that I'm focused on as I'm watching this team and considering Brandon Hyde as a manager. That is something that that's his department.
Yeah.
I'm not saying the lineup is not his department. Like I said, I have no idea. I know that this is a collaborative organization with a lot of smart people who make smart decisions, and he's part of that. I think that what we're kind of getting at is that the things that are his responsibility are also things we could be watching.
Yes. And also some of those things have been subpar so far this season.
Year. Yes. In certain cases. And that's, I think we're talking about player specific stuff. I mean, we've had two strange things in that, Brandon Hyde hates walks, and Sugano's first at bat being a walk is we're going to laugh about it, because if he has more outings like he did in Kansas City than he did in Toronto, it's going to be funny to think back on that first 4-pitch walk. But and then you have Gunnar Henderson booting a ball on his first opportunity. It's this is not going to happen all the time. There's stuff like that. But for him to say out loud, we threw to the wrong base 3 times and we need to stop doing that. And by we, I think he was referring to one person.
Yep.
Those are the types of things that resonate more with me than where and why and when Jorge Mateo plays.
And another one that stuck out to me as well in Kansas City was Cionel Perez throws 37 pitches in a disastrous inning, and Brandon Hyde saying, we went out to check on the mound and we offered him the opportunity to redo the mound and freshen it up with dry dirt. He didn't want to do that. That was said for a reason, and we asked Cionel Perez after the game or the next day, and through interpreter Brandon Quinones, and he said, I thought about it, but I didn't want to slow the game down even more and get more out of rhythm. But certainly that was said for a certain reason, because that's Brandon Hyde expressing how he felt about that situation. So
Yes.
it's a long, fraught conversation. We're going to talk more about Brandon Hyde throughout the season. I've got a big question about Brandon Hyde, but I want to save that for a different podcast.
Okay.
John, I feel like I've taken up enough of your time at this point already. It's 3:51. But I do want to talk also about, real quick, the extensions, because we've seen so many extensions signed so far. It's extension season in the first 2 weeks of the season. Vlad Guerrero Jr. signed his extension with the Toronto Blue Jays for $500 million. A cool half a bill for 14 years for Vladdy. I'm not sure how that's going to work out. Everybody says the Blue Jays were backed into a corner by their fans, so they probably had to do it. But I get that we got a lot of questions about extensions when we had a banner subscriber breakfast right before opening the home opener, John. And it was, the cool question was, why haven't the Orioles signed these guys to extensions? What's holding a lot of people back? And I think one answer we kept coming back to was Scott Boras is in charge of several of the Orioles' very young, very good players, including Gunnar Henderson and Jordan Westburg. Scott Boras does not like his clients to sign extensions. There are exceptions, Steven Strasburg, Jose Altuve, but there are also instances where, the majority of the time he would rather the guy get to free agency and cash in, because odds are you're going to make more money in the long term. And another big reason that I think the Orioles haven't extended a guy who is not a Boras client, who is Adley Rutschman, is that Samuel Basallo exists as well. The Orioles have Adley Rutschman under contract for a few more years, but Samuel Basallo is one of the top prospects in all of baseball, and he plays the same position as Adley Rutschman. And sure, the Orioles could work out something where they extend Adley Rutschman. He's here to stay for the next 10 years, and Samuel Basallo is his backup catcher, but also is first base and also DHs, and they find a way to make it work for the two of them for a long time. But it is important to note that Adley Rutschman plays the same position as one of the Orioles' top prospects. And when the Orioles see an opportunity to transition from one player to another, go to one of their top prospects, they're going to take that opportunity, as we've seen time and time again.
Yeah. And the Vlad Guerrero, I think it's difficult. Every time one of these is signed, there's always a reason why you can't overlay it to some certain Oriole. When Christian Campbell signs a week into his career, the Orioles were not operating as a team that was ever going to sign any of these kind of extensions when Gunnar Henderson was a week into his career.
Exactly.
So those are all in the same, in their own bucket. I think the Vlad Guerrero one, and I was trying to verify, and I don't think I did a good job as I was looking at it while you were talking. I think this structure might actually be a little more useful where the Orioles are concerned than some of the young guys, because my understanding is that I saw that this was actually pretty front loaded in terms of Vlad Guerrero's annual salaries over these 14 years. So the Blue Jays, I saw a chart. I wish I could say who it was that put it out, basically that he would have to be a 5 or so win player for the next 5 years for those salaries to work out. And then the salaries actually decrease versus it being a lot of money towards the end when you don't want to be paying someone like that. And that's reasonable. I think that's something the Orioles would maybe want to do if they're going to structure a contract like this. If they are convicted in their models and think Gunnar Henderson's going to be a 7-win player for 7 more years, pay him like that. And then, maybe overpay a little on the back end and whatever premium you have to do. It's just challenging. And for every contract that gets signed, for a reason, we mentioned Adley Rutschman and Samuel Basallo of it all. I think there's room for everybody to be on this team for a long time if that's what the Orioles want. I am generally uncomfortable with the idea that every contract extension is now a referendum on the Orioles in that world. But again, you make your own bed.
Yeah.
There's plenty of players they could sign still. Who's to say that they're not going to announce one the second we stop recording this?
Exactly.
I will say that, but you see these things keep happening, and I think one of the things that also you need to keep in mind is every time that happens, every time somebody signs a contract extension, that's one fewer free agent, and X, and
Yeah.
that means the free agents who do get to the market, which at this point will be all of the Orioles players, will be even more in demand than they would be because there's no one else to sign.
I also don't think Mike Elias is seeing all these extensions and going, boy, we really got to get something done here. That he feels any more pressure just because he sees some deal get done somewhere else with another team.
Yeah, I'm sure they would love to use some of these as precedents.
Sure.
But
the way the market is going, I don't know.
Yeah, you'd have to do that. You have to catch it at the right time. You need it's a very specific, and granted, it's a cocktail mix that more and more teams are finding the right balance of, because more and more teams are signing their young players to these contracts. But it's one the Orioles haven't been able to land, haven't gotten it just right yet.
The price of the brick, John.
It's going up.
It's going up. At John Meoli is his handle, and Matt Paul Mancano have taken up too much of his time already. You got to give us a 5-star review, and I'll read out here on the show. Give us a like, a thumbs up, all that good stuff. Thanks so much for listening, and subscribe to the Baltimore Banner. $1 for 6 months. Get inside the dugout, John's outstanding newsletter. Best wishes to Danielle Allentuck while she recovers, and follow Andy Kuska as he continues to cover the Orioles series in Arizona. Thanks for tuning in.
Congratulations to me for winning the Banner's Women's March Madness bracket.
I wasn't going to say that specifically.
I wanted to make sure it was known. There's a little school up in Connecticut. They won again. Can you believe it?
I'm absolutely shocked.
Can you believe it?
Thanks so much.